Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Just got back from a fun night out. Went to a restaurant with a $250,000 sound system. Really cool. And also a DJ that was really good tonight. Took Tracy Chapman Fast Car and turned it into a danceable song. I think somebody did some video, and if I can get it, I'll put some excerpt of it here, something. You can take a look. But anyway, on the way back, I started thinking it's time for me to do a video on one of the two topics, or at least the stuff that I said I would never do. The first thing I said I would never do, and I'm still not doing it, is turning this into a review site where I'm asking manufacturers for gear and doing all the same gear like you see on YouTube, right? Recently, it's like everybody's doing Polk reserve speakers and then Rel T5s and then Chinese integrated amps making the rounds. And, not that I'm snobbish about that gear. It's just, I'm not going to pull out a Rel 25 for a T5 and be able to give an enthusiastic review like some of these other guys have given that those products do deserve. It's just, for me, I'm not going to be able to do that. And these guys are already doing so many of them that there's no need for me to do it. So, and I'm not snobbish at all about this. It's like, as you've seen, I have shown some really expensive gear, some really cool stuff that's pricey, but I've also shown MBL Extremes. I'm doing a GR Research and Extreme. I've shown these speakers are $2,000 from 20 years ago, how to tweak them and improve them to get them up to a higher level of performance. I've shown with vibration control, expensive Townsend, and then homegrown solutions, how you can do it cheaper. Expensive amps like Burmester, and then I've shown a more reasonable priced option going the McCormick modified route, custom design. So I try to, balance the really expensive, cool stuff with also trying to find reasonable ways to get that same performance. So that piggybacks well into what I'm going to do the video on today, which I thought I never would do, the subject of cables. Because I do think I can show you how to get similar level performance to the expensive stuff at reasonable prices based on my experience. But there's another reason why I'm picking, particularly right now, the time to do it, because there's some things going on in the industry that may impact a video that I do in the future related to the arguments on cables. And so let me set the stage if you haven't been paying attention. Online, there's always been this debate of cables don't make a difference, cables do make a difference, everything makes a difference. There's no snake oil, there is snake oil. Measurements always matter, measurements don't matter, blind testing, no blind testing. And it's like politics, nobody ever changed their mind, but they like to argue. And what's happened recently is two sets of rivals have kind of been on the polar extremes of each of these dogmas, and things have now come to a head, which made the impetus of me doing this video, because it may impact what I do in a video pretty soon. So let's talk about that. On one set of rivals is Gene De La Sala with Audioholics, and he's been for 10 years talking about snake oil and cables and whatnot. And then there's Ted Denny with Synergistic Research, who's their lead designer, and obviously he believes in cables, and he's actually got some stuff like quantum tunneling that really, it's got some questionable scientific background of his own, but also what he's claiming. And so that triggers the people that are objective and science-based. And so they've been going head to head, and then it just spiraled, in the past year really bad with Gene had COVID and Ted made fun of him and his GoFundMe, and it got a little bit too toxic and classless, and then there was back and forth. Gene was supposedly contacting his distributors. So it got kind of nasty and has built to a head, but I'll come back to that rivalry in a second. The other set of rivals, been a little more gentlemanly, more tongue-in-cheek jabs at each other, is Danny Ritchie with GR Research. As you know, I know him. I've been to his place a couple times, and I'm building his N Extreme speakers. So I respect what he does. I like his stuff. And then there's Amir on the other side, who I've been following his site for a long time. I think there's a place for him in the hobby that's very valuable. I mean, I like to see how things are engineered. I like to see his measurements. And I like to see that quality of construction. It doesn't mean I'm going to buy strictly based on the rankings of how he does signal to noise ratio, but it's still valuable to understand and something that I appreciate. So anyway, what happened in this rivalry is that Danny started doing some videos saying cables make a difference. And he used something that was a little bit head scratching as I scratched my head. He was doing a vintage tuner and hooking up wire to it and using the gauge on the vintage tuner to show how wires can be antennas and speaker wire can be antennas, and that cables can make a difference because of that. A little head scratching because, you know, you can just hook up the cables to your system and let's hear from the actual speaker if we're picking up a radio wire, a radio station or something. But nevertheless, then he went into inductors, which was even more kind of head scratching, as to show why cables make a difference. So at first I was scratching my head, oh, where's Danny going with this? Because on the flip side, Amir was going with countering with basic measurements, you know, verifiable science and physics and stuff like that. And it's very convincing, you know, it is based on science. But Danny has now countered with something that, what more can you ask? He said, I'll do blind testing at my place on my with these cables and show you that I can hear certain things that you can't measure, which, you know, that can be the case too. Not everything, science is not always right. We've seen it with COVID. You know, there's always changing what people think at one time, what this is about, what the death rates are, you know, all these things. I don't even get into all that, but science can be questioned and experts can be wrong. And if he's got the ability to prove it in a blind test that's, you know, credible, what more can you ask? You know, forget about those other videos that are a little more head scratching. If he can do that, that's great. So I even reached out and sent him an email and said, hey, I'm right down the road. I'll come up there and I'll video it as a third party if you want or whatnot. So we'll see if he responds or if he gets, I know the new Record Day guy runs his channel, so maybe he'll do it. But anyway, I'm offering and would like to, and the same thing has happened with the other two rivals just as of yesterday, which again is the reason why I'm doing this video, because that's come to a head where Ted offered to fly Gene to California. They'll do measurements of Ted's products and then listen. I don't know if I assume it means he'll do blind testing. It was a little bit more nebulous, not like Danny was flat out saying, I'll do a blind test, no problem. I don't think Ted used those words, but I guess it implied that he will do listening blind test to prove his products. And same with those two guys. I will fly out to California. I'm lucky I have the ability to do this. I will be a third-party observer and film it. More than happy to do it because I think it's worthwhile if we can put some of these things to rest. Can some certain people hear easily, verifiable in a blind test, the difference in cables? Because the other two reasons I'm doing this video, let's get to those. Number one, people have asked me, what have been my experience with cables? And then another reason I'm doing this is because they want to know which cables I'm using. So I want to do this video so I can just refer people to this anytime they ask. And so my experience is that I haven't really been able to hear, I've heard differences in cable, no question. But I haven't heard huge deltas in most cables that are short length and between two pieces of gear that are pretty friendly to each other. So that's why I never thought I would do a video, because I got so much content and other things to suggest to you, from speaker setup, room treatments, DSP, all those tweaks and accessories I just did a video on. I put those all higher on the totem pole over cables. Now, I have heard differences in cables, and here's where I've heard some differences. Some of them do have just masterful engineering. They do superior engineering, and it's taken me a while to find some of these cables that I've now settled on that I find are meeting some parameters and delivering performance that I think do exceed anything I've had in the past. But again, it's not huge difference. But where I have heard very noticeable differences in cable really can be tied not so much to the cable. People forget, they always want to look at the cable, but they never look at the two pieces of the gear that it's connecting. And that's where the cable sometimes can be a bigger or less influential piece of the puzzle. And I'll give you two examples happened to me. Many years ago, I had a passive preamp with no buffered output stage and had an RCA cable going all the way across the room to an amplifier with a pretty low input impedance. And just by coincidence, the cable had really high capacitance. So even the most adamant, objectivist would say, okay, if that's a pretty long length and it's high capacitance enough, yeah, you could probably hear a difference. And sure enough, once I either moved my gear closer or used other cables that were low capacitance, it improved the situation. I also had a $15,000 tube DAC and then a low input impedance amp. And then the certain tubes that I was using and their impedance wasn't a good match to the input impedance of the amp. So was the cable really the reason? It could influence it, obviously, because everything in that signal chain was more precarious because of the mismatch in gear. Would it be better if I just got tubes that gave a better impedance or a better solid state DAC to mate with that? Yes, there's a lot of variables that go into it, not just cable. But that's where I found niche situations where the delta in hearing a difference with cables was, on the highest end. On the lower end of hearing it, and sometimes you have to just listen for a long time for that niche stuff, would be masterful engineering, really high quality cables that do perform on the metric side of things really high. With interconnects, it's low capacitance, and with speaker cables, it's low inductance and resistance. But I'll give you another example like I gave you with interconnects. Speaker cables can make a big difference too if you've got super low inductance and you've raised the capacitance so high and you're using an amplifier that can oscillate easily. I've seen that happen in the past where, man, you can damage your equipment, okay? Even though you're technically getting a superior cable, low inductance speaker cable, everybody would say, oh, that's what you want. If the capacitance is so high, that was a problem back when Gertz, the sandwiched flat conductors back in the day, was making cables. Everybody was buying those, and some amplifiers were just blowing up left and right. A lot of amplifiers would, implemented Zobels as a solution and their own internal solutions to fix it. Hey, we just saw it with the Avalon and Spectral room I did not too long ago. Spectral gear probably would go crazy with high capacitance long run of speaker cable, but they dictate that you should only use MIT cable with the network box and whatnot with their things in order to keep the warranty. So those are people actually using science as well as measurements and gear interfaces to show you that the cable can and will matter almost to the level of damaging your equipment, definitely damaging it, on top of an audibility aspect. So that's where you need to invest in understanding cable. You just can't put lamp cord or whatnot. You probably can get away with really cheap cable in most cases, but like I said, there are niche situations where you need to pay attention to certain things and not just put anything between your gear. And there's also just a pride of ownership and masterful engineering. Even if it's not audible, you got to appreciate companies that go that extra step. And so now let's talk about the third reason I'm doing this video. Which one? That's the question I get. Which cables do you use? And which ones do you recommend? So in my experience, my friend Doug got these Townsend speaker cables, and I would definitely buy those as well. I don't have them yet, but again, companies that put out white papers that are very detailed, he's not just taking OEM wire from China and sticking in a fancy jacket and putting doohickeys on it. There is some science, and even if it's not going to change audibility a huge amount, there's a lot to it. He's not even putting wires or directionality, and that's kind of another thing as a pet peeve. How can it be directional if it's AC? An alternating current. But anyway, he passes the smell test for me, and it's worked well for him. I'm not going to tell you what speaker cable I'm using. Let's do a little fun thing. I'll put a picture up, see if any of you guys can guess it, but it's not as obvious as you might think. I'll give the answer at some point in the comments, but whoever guesses it right first, as long as you're not one of the people I know already knows my stuff, I'll go ahead and maybe give you a free Audioquest Jitterbug, or one of these tweaks that I've featured in the other video that I'm not using anymore. You'll have to pay the shipping though. But anyway, let's talk about interconnects. What brands have I found that work? Well, first of all, tons will work. Everything from Blue Jean cables to even Home Depot cords. I don't begrudge people that are using those. Would I use them? No, because I do have Blue Jean cables in my other system. It's just not high end for me. The look, the aesthetics, and then you have to terminate them yourself. I like the companies that go that next level and then provide an aesthetic element and then a little bit more masterful engineering theoretically in it. I feel more comfortable, even if it's not night and day in my experience hearing the difference. So shoot me if that's, if there's a problem with that. What I have found with interconnects that are my favorite over the years is a company called River Cables. Nothing too fancy with their jackets, more of a, function over, aesthetics, but it's attractive. And Star Quad XLRs is what I mentioned in the other video for a noise floor perspective and also from performance. I've just found these are super reliable, super good for a very reasonable cost. And one thing that they did that separated themselves from even some mega dollar price cables, I've had mega dollar transparent cables with those big boxes and speaker cables. I've had pure silver interconnects to compare to these kind of things. So, it's not like I don't try other things. I've got 30 years of trying a ton of stuff. But where these guys kind of earn my business and separate themselves is they give you not only high quality cable with measurements on their website of what the key parameters are, but they also give you, let me grab it, with each cable, they'll give you measurements. After it's terminated at the length you ordered, hey, what does it measure? And the reason I find is, even if you don't know what the applicable measurement is, this is for a digital cable, but they'll have one. I've got tons of cables from them. I bought almost everything from them. Speaker cable, they will give you, even if you don't understand the measurements, this is a level of quality control and a thing that speaks high end to me more than a fancy box. Yeah, I like a fancy box, but I'm not going to use it ever again. What I've found, and everybody's probably seen this with HDMI cables or charging cables with your phone, a lot of them are defective or become defective quickly over time. So having a level of quality control and the measurements as terminated and at the length I ordered is something that I wasn't getting from all of these high-priced cable companies that I tried. And this spoke to me as high-end, so they earned my business. Unfortunately, with COVID, they went on hiatus. They say they're coming back with new products. I don't know if it's going to happen. So, unfortunately, River Cables I may be stuck with these for a while. But there's a lot of other brands, that you can try. And my friends use Nordost. 3MA sells Nordost. They're not for me, but I've attended. I want to talk about things that my experience. I've gone to shows. I have attended the Wireworld demo where they do the fixed wire, no wire between two pieces of gear. Then they put one quality of their cable, the next quality, and they play the things and you listen and hear the difference. I've gone to Synergistic Research's room and heard them swap out cables and try to prove their product makes a difference. And I've done the Nordost display, spent over an hour in them in their room where they would swap out, in their case, power cables. And I'm not talking about power cables today because I've got a different video I'll share on that. I don't want this one to get too long. And power cables are another level of cable thing that I've done some more research on. Let me just save that for another video. But I have experience listening and going through all of what they want you to participate in. I've participated in. Okay, so I put in my skins, and I've owned enough that I feel comfortable where I am now with these products, and I feel comfortable recommending them to you with the caveats I'm saying. Anywhere you go, you're not probably going to hear a huge difference. But if you want something that's masterfully engineered, a high-end experience, quality construction, reliable, that can match some of the high dollar stuff. I like the high dollar stuff as much as anybody. I've gone to people's houses where they spent more on cords than their actual house. I ran the numbers. True story. I thought it was awesome. It's cool. And the system sounded great. But like I said, I like to show you some of those things, but some ways to get similar performance at a more reasonable price. And these are much more reasonable. There's a lot of other companies that are in that same ballpark that you can do Star Quad XLRs for. And so those are some of the tips I can give you with cables and where the industry is. Hopefully I'll have some videos maybe of these blind tests, because that will be very impressive if people can do that under a short demo and prove that they can hear it. Because I just don't think I would bank myself being able to hear on a short A/B demo, unless it was the scenarios that I talked about that were very drastic problems between equipment, or you had a defective cable, with very weird parameters that is tieable to the measurements. So anyway, hope you find this helpful. If so, sign up, subscribe. Go ahead and leave some comments if you've done even more testing than me and you've got some thoughts to share. I'm willing to learn from anybody on this stuff. I just wanted to share with you what I have done and what I'm using, so that I can link this in the future if anybody wants to know. But the journey continues with me. I'm open to hearing and seeing new things in the future. Okay, we'll see you guys soon.